Okay, let's cut across now to big breaking news that's coming in as we shift focus. MEA refutes US Commerce Secretary Lutnick's remarks. Remember, Lutnick had suggested that the trade deal window has come to an end because Prime Minister Modi didn't have a conversation with US President Donald Trump. The MEA has remarked on this, saying very clearly that Lutnick's comments are not accurate and that Prime Minister Modi and President Trump have also spoken on the phone on 8 occasions. So the MEA giving those details, saying that in 2025 alone, there have been 8 different occasions when they've had conversations on different aspects of the partnership between India and America. The MEA has also said that they were committed, both countries were committed to negotiating a trade agreement. And that since then, there have been multiple rounds of negotiation, that there's been conversation. Remember, Lutnick had essentially suggested that there is no trade deal that will happen because that window is closed, simply because Prime Minister Modi didn't speak to President Trump. Let's play out for you what the MEA has had to say.
We have seen the remarks. India and the United States were committed to negotiating a bilateral trade agreement with the US as far back as 13th of February last year, that is. Since then, two sides have held multiple rounds of negotiations to arrive at a balanced and mutually beneficial trade agreement. On several occasions, we have been close to a deal. The characterization of these discussions in the reported remarks is not accurate. We remain interested in a mutually beneficial trade deal between two complementary economies and look forward to concluding it. Incidentally, Prime Minister and President Trump have also spoken on phone on 8 occasions during 2025, covering different aspects of our wide-ranging partnership.
So there you have Lutnick going ahead and suggesting that there was no conversation between Prime Minister Modi and President Trump, and that's what led to the trade deal not breaking through till now, and suggesting that the window for a trade deal is also closed. And the MEA has made it very, very clear that these remarks are simply inaccurate. Why? Because on record, and we've got details of this, in 2025 there were multiple conversations between Prime Minister Modi and Trump through the course, by the way, of the negotiations of the trade deal. That's something even President Trump has posted about. Every time he had a conversation with Prime Minister Modi, he'd take to social media and confirm that such a conversation indeed took place. So what is Lutnick actually referring to? The MEA therefore is highlighted the number of times there have been conversations, saying 8 times Prime Minister Modi and President Trump have spoken in 2025 alone. So there's no question of any sort of lack of communication that led to a trade deal not going through. In fact, the MEA maintains that talks have happened for the last many months and perhaps will continue. But what does this actually mean for the India-US partnership and for that trade deal? Let's bring in Pranay Upadhyay of India Today Global for more details on that. Pranay, the MEA essentially suggesting that, what Lutnick has said is simply not true, that there's been a conversation between President Trump and Prime Minister Modi 8 times in 2025 alone. And so with, in fact, this kind of a fact check coming in from MEA, where does that leave the trade deal talks?
Those trade deal talks are still in limbo, Akshita. But this clearly shows that how the differences are still persisting, because the thing which has been mentioned by Howard Lutnick in his podcast interview, that there has been no phone call or there is no leadership level contact between Indian Prime Minister and President Donald Trump is not factually correct. Because if you see the timeline of the event, on 13th of February precisely, 2025, Prime Minister Narendra Modi visited Washington DC and President Donald Trump, they had a meeting, and after that, both countries decided to launch the negotiation for the bilateral trade agreement. After that, the first phone call, before US decided to increase the tariffs up to 50%, before that, in early June 2025, there was a phone call between Prime Minister Narendra Modi and US President Donald Trump. And in fact, President Donald Trump invited Prime Minister Narendra Modi while he was in G7, that you should drop by, you should come to Washington DC, and we'll have discussion. Because of the prior engagement, Prime Minister Narendra Modi couldn't go there, but there was a phone call. After that, we have seen that in September, President Donald Trump congratulated and wished expressed his, sent his birthday wishes to Prime Minister Narendra Modi. There was a phone call on Diwali. There was a phone call, and there has been successive phone calls between both the leaders. So when Harsh Lutnick says that there is no leadership level contact, he's not factually correct, because there has been 7 to 8 phone calls and direct level contacts between. And even if you see the social media timeline of both President Donald Trump and Prime Minister Narendra Modi, it clearly indicates that they both the leaders have discussed the bilateral trade agreement as well. Even if you see the social media timeline of President Donald Trump on his Truth Social as well as on social media platform X, it clearly mentions that President Donald Trump himself has said, Akshita, that India and United States are very close to conclude the bilateral trade agreement, and he has expressed hope, and he also said that he is likely to visit India in early 2016.
No, and there are so many mismatches here, whether it's what Lutnick said or whether it's what Trump said a couple of days ago when he kind of suggested that Prime Minister Modi said, "May I meet you, sir?" And so there are so many mismatches that just don't add up. But thanks very much, Pranay, for joining us with all of those details. The one question that constantly comes up when you hear these kind of contradictory comments is, what has happened to the trade deal as well? And when will we see movement on that front?